40 years ago, China was one of the poorest countries on earth. Most people lived in villages, food was rationed, factories were outdated, foreign companies stayed away. Today, China is the world's second largest economy, a manufacturing giant, and a global power that shapes markets, technology, and politics. This transformation did not take centuries. It happened within a single lifetime. The real question is not what China became, but how it pulled off one of the most dramatic economic turnarounds in human history. And once you see the steps clearly, you'll realize this story is far more calculated, fragile, and human than most people think. In the late 1970s, China was exhausted. Decades of political campaigns and strict central planning had left the economy broken. Farms produced too little food. Factories had no incentive to improve. Innovation was punished, not rewarded. Most Chinese citizens had never seen a private business. The country was isolated from global trade, global finance, and global ideas. China was large, proud, and ancient, but economically, it was stuck in time. Then something unusual happened. China's leaders quietly admitted failure, not publicly, not emotionally, but practically. They accepted a simple truth: ideology alone could not feed a nation of nearly 1 billion people. Survival came first, growth came second, everything else would follow. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping emerged as the key figure behind this shift. He did not overthrow the political system. He did not promise democracy. What he did was far more dangerous in his own way. He allowed experimentation. Deng famously said it did not matter whether a cat was black or white, as long as it caught mice. That sentence signaled a historic change. Results mattered more than theory. The first experiment started in the countryside. For decades, farmers worked on collective land. They were paid the same whether they worked hard or not. Production was low, and hunger was common. Local officials, desperate for solutions, quietly allowed farmers to keep extra crops after meeting government quotas. Productivity exploded. Almost overnight, when Beijing saw the results, instead of shutting it down, they legalized it. This single decision changed the lives of hundreds of millions. For the first time, effort had a reward. Families worked longer hours, food production surged, hunger declined, rural incomes rose. This created something China had lacked for generations: momentum. When people believe their work can improve their lives, behavior changes fast. But farming alone could not transform a nation. China needed factories, technology, and access to global markets. This is where the next gamble began. China opened special economic zones along its coast. These areas operated under different rules. Foreign companies were invited in, taxes were lower, regulations were lighter, workers were plentiful and cheap. To many outsiders, this looked risky. China had little experience with capitalism. Its legal system was weak. Its infrastructure was poor. But global companies saw something else. They saw scale, millions of workers, a government willing to build roads, ports, and power plants fast, and most importantly, a long-term commitment to growth. Factories began to rise. At first, China made simple goods: toys, shoes, clothes, products with thin margins and intense competition. But China learned quickly. Each factory trained workers. Each shipment taught logistics. Each foreign partnership transferred knowledge. China did not jump to the top. It climbed step by step. If you're finding this breakdown useful, this is exactly the kind of long-term story we focus on here at Finance Historian Time, where understanding the past helps explain the world we live in today. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, so you don't miss how these historical shifts continue shaping global finance and power. As factories spread, cities exploded. People left farms for urban jobs. This migration was one of the largest in human history. Entire skylines appeared in decades, not centuries. The government guided this process carefully. Housing, transport, and industry were planned together. Mistakes were made, but the direction stayed consistent. China also did something few developing nations managed to do. It saved a lot. Households saved, companies saved, the government saved. These savings funded massive investment: highways, railways, ports, power grids, while other countries borrowed heavily. China relied mostly on its own capital. This gave it control and stability. Education followed. Universities expanded, technical training improved, engineers, managers, and scientists were trained at scale. China did not just want cheap labor forever, it wanted skills, it wanted technology, it wanted independence. At the same time, China kept tight political control. This is uncomfortable for many viewers, but it is central to the story. The government suppressed dissent and controlled information. In return, it delivered growth, jobs, and rising living standards. This trade-off shaped modern China. It reduced chaos but limited freedom. Whether this balance can last is a question we'll return to later. By the 1990s, the results were undeniable. Growth averaged near double digits. Poverty fell at a speed never seen before. Hundreds of millions escaped extreme hardship. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, fully integrating into the global economy. This was not just symbolic. It locked China into global rules and opened even more markets. But there was a hidden cost. Building beneath the surface, inequality widened. Coastal cities surged ahead, while inland regions lagged. Environmental damage piled up. Rivers polluted, air thickened. Growth was real, but it was not clean or balanced. China responded again with adaptation. It invested in renewable energy. It pushed higher value industries. Electronics replaced textiles. Smartphones replaced toys. Companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent emerged, not by copying forever, but by competing. What makes China's rise so fascinating is not just speed, it is flexibility. Policies changed when they failed. Experiments expanded when they worked. There was no fixed blueprint, only direction. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because China's biggest challenges did not appear at the beginning, they appeared after success. Debt rose, population growth slowed, global tensions increased. The same system that powered growth now faces limits. By the early 2000s, China had achieved something no developing country had ever done at this scale. It became the factory of the world. Almost everything you touched had some link to China. Clothes, electronics, furniture, toys. This phase created wealth. But Chinese leaders knew it could not last forever. Low wages would eventually rise. Other countries would compete. If China stayed stuck making cheap goods, growth would slow, and social stability would be at risk. So the strategy shifted again. This time, the goal was not just to make things, but to design them, not just to assemble technology, but to own it. The government began pushing heavy investment into higher value industries. Steel and cement were replaced by semiconductors, telecom equipment, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing. State banks provided cheap credit. Local governments competed to attract tech firms. Entire cities were redesigned around innovation zones. At the same time, Chinese consumers changed. Incomes rose. Millions entered the middle class. People bought smartphones, cars, and homes. This internal demand became a second engine of growth. China was no longer only exporting to the world. It was selling to itself. Companies like Alibaba and Tencent grew in this environment. They thrived because China's digital economy skipped steps. Many people never used desktop computers. They went straight to mobile payments, online shopping, and app-based services. This created massive platforms at incredible speed, but behind this success was a deeper structure. China never fully abandoned state control. The government allowed private companies to grow, but only within boundaries. Key sectors like banking, energy, and telecom stayed under firm oversight. The message was clear. You can get rich, but you cannot challenge political authority. This model confused outsiders. Was China capitalist or socialist? The real answer is neither in the pure sense. China built a hybrid system. Markets handled efficiency, the state handled direction. When markets failed, the government stepped in. When state firms stagnated, competition was introduced. One of the most important tools China used was infrastructure. High-speed rail connected cities faster than planes. Ports became the most efficient in the world. Logistics costs dropped sharply. This made Chinese companies more competitive globally and domestically. Another key factor was patience. Western companies often think in quarters. Chinese planning often stretches across decades. Projects that looked unprofitable at first were sustained because they served long-term goals. This long view became a strategic advantage. But success created new problems. Debt grew rapidly. Local governments borrowed heavily to build projects. Real estate became a major driver of growth. Apartments were built faster than people could move in. Prices surged. For many families, property became their main form of savings. This worked as long as prices rose, but it also created risk. If real estate slowed, confidence could crack, and confidence, once broken, is hard to restore. At the same time, China's population began to change. The one-child policy, which once helped control growth, now created an aging society, fewer young workers, more retirees. The demographic dividend that powered early growth was fading. China tried to respond. Automation increased. Robots replaced labor. Education focused more on science and engineering. Productivity became the new goal, not just scale. Then came the global reaction. As China moved into advanced industries, it stopped being just a partner. It became a competitor. Trade tensions rose. Technology restrictions followed. Supply chains became political. This was a turning point. China realized it could no longer rely on open global markets the way it once did. It needed self-sufficiency in critical technologies, chips, energy, food, data. Massive resources were poured into domestic innovation. Some efforts succeeded, others struggled. Catching up in advanced technology is far harder than assembling finished products. Progress became uneven. At the same time, political control tightened. The government increased oversight of tech firms. Regulations expanded. Some companies lost value. Overnight, to investors, this looked shocking. To Beijing, it looked necessary. The logic was simple. Economic power must never become political power. Stability came first, even if growth slowed. This is the central tension of modern China. Growth requires freedom to experiment. Control limits risk but also limits creativity. So far, China has managed this balance better than most expected, but the margin for error is shrinking. What makes this moment so important is that China is no longer catching up. It is approaching the frontier. And history shows that moving from middle-income to high-income status is the hardest leap of all. By the 2020s, China reached a stage no developing nation ever wants to face. But every successful one must. The era of easy growth was over. There were no more massive pools of cheap labor to absorb, no empty coastline left to industrialize, no simple technologies left to copy. From this point forward, every step became harder, slower, and riskier. This is where many historical success stories begin to break down. China's leadership understood this danger well. History was clear. Countries that failed to adapt at this stage often stalled for decades. So the strategy shifted again, this time toward control, resilience, and long-term survival rather than speed. One of the first priorities became national security through economics. China reduced its dependence on foreign suppliers wherever possible. Energy pipelines were diversified. Food reserves expanded. Domestic chip production became a national mission. These moves were not about short-term profit. They were about reducing vulnerability. At the same time, growth slowed. This was not accidental. It was tolerated. In some cases, it was even engineered. Risky sectors like real estate were reined in. Debt expansion was curbed. Speculation was discouraged. For a country used to rapid expansion, this felt uncomfortable. But from the government's perspective, stability mattered more than headlines. The real estate slowdown revealed something important. China's system is highly coordinated. When authorities decide to change direction, the impact is immediate and widespread. This can prevent crises from spiraling out of control. But it can also shock confidence. Investors learn that policy risk in China is real and powerful. Meanwhile, global pressure intensified. Trade disputes turned into technology barriers. Chinese firms faced restrictions abroad. Western governments began reshaping supply chains. Globalization, as China once knew it, began to fragment. China responded by turning inward and outward at the same time. Domestically, it pushed innovation, digital infrastructure, and industrial upgrades. Internationally, it expanded trade relationships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The goal was simple: never rely too heavily on any single market again. This period also exposed a deep truth about China's rise. It was never just an economic story, it was a governance story. The system prioritized coordination, long-term planning, and political continuity. This allowed massive projects to happen fast, but it also concentrated decision-making power at the top. For decades, rising living standards helped maintain public support. Most people accepted limited political freedom in exchange for economic security, but as growth slows, expectations change. People begin to care more about quality of life, fairness, and opportunity. This creates a new challenge. Managing a wealthy society is very different from managing a poor one. Demands increase. Mistakes become less tolerable, social trust becomes harder to maintain. China's aging population adds another layer. Fewer workers must support more retirees. Healthcare and pensions become heavier burdens. Productivity must rise just to stand still. There is no easy fix for this. Immigration, which helped Western economies, is politically sensitive in China. Technology is now the main battlefield. Artificial intelligence, automation, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing will decide the next phase. China is investing heavily, but it faces limits. Innovation thrives on openness, debate, and risk-taking. Control can slow those forces. Still, it would be a mistake to underestimate China. The country has repeatedly defied predictions of collapse. Each time constraints appeared, adaptation followed, not perfectly, not without pain, but with persistence. What makes China unique is scale. Policies that fail in smaller countries can be absorbed in China. Experiments can be tried in one region without destabilizing the whole system. This flexibility remains a powerful advantage for the rest of the world. China's story carries important lessons. Rapid growth is possible without copying Western models. Exactly. Markets and state power do not have to be enemies, but every model has trade-offs. Speed can hide risk. Control can hide inefficiency. As we step back and look at the full picture, China's rise was not magic. It was the result of incentives, discipline, learning, and timing. The right decisions, made at the right moments, by leaders willing to adjust course. The next 40 years will not look like the last 40. Growth will be slower, tensions will be higher, the margin for error will be smaller, but the foundations built since the late 1970s are deep. Whether China becomes a stable high-income society or faces prolonged strain will depend on choices still being made today. And those choices will shape not just China, but the global economy we all share. That's why understanding this history matters. It helps us see beyond headlines and fear. It shows how systems rise, evolve, and get tested. If you've watched this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think China's model can adapt again? Or has it reached its limits? Share your opinion in the comments, because these conversations matter more than ever. And if you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who wants to understand how power really forms over time. This is Finance Historian Time, where we connect history, economics, and human behavior to make sense of the world ahead.